What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video from Pink Tourmaline. By the way, I apologize in advance if my audio is not the best today. I bought a new mic not too long ago and it just broke. Anyways, so hopefully this is decent audio. I just want to start out by saying that. Now, we're getting into Gnosticism, and this is Gnosticism Revisited. The reason why I wanted to revisit this topic is because as the channel was getting going, Gnosticism was one of the first things that I discovered that broke me out of the New Age mindset and the New Age ideas and philosophies in terms of what is the purpose of life and why are we here, etc. And it was really foundational and fundamental for awakening my mind is the way I would put it. Does that mean I am a Gnostic or Gnosticism is my religion? No. And I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I will be this ism or that, whatever it might be, right? That is antithetical to my whole journey. I plan to continuously build and maybe center eventually on some theory that feels pretty secure, but always aim to keep learning more, whether it's externally or internally, and continue to revise over and over. Just like anything we see in life, we want to keep studying and refining. This should be no different. This is a study of the nature of reality, just like a study of chemicals or biology or any of those would be. It's a constant refinement. So anyways, I would not say that this is, and I want you to view Gnosticism through the same lens, that it is a piece of information, quite convincing piece of information in terms of describing the entire nature of reality. And as we go through, we're going to be comparing to other ideologies or other belief systems. And again, this is just something to ask yourself if it resonates with you as much as it does me. But the reason why I want to come back to it is I've learned so much about so many different topics since I first discovered Gnosticism. And so I wanted to go back with a lot of the new information and look back on a lot of these old concepts and maybe add in some ideas or some thoughts that I've had since discovering Gnosticism as an overlay as we re-explore some of the foundational topics that really resonated with Gnosticism, with us from Gnosticism, and continue to resonate. A lot of those things that I really resonated with me from the get-go, I want to look at them once again with the context that I now have for how everything works together. And the other reason is I came across this really cool video that I wanted to show you guys that steps through a lot of the fundamental and foundational pieces. So we're going to use that as the baseline to build out this framework. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into it. Let's get into Gnosticism. Let's go. Oh, last thing I'll say, which is interesting about Gnosticism compared to, let's just talk about mainstream religion, Christianity, even Judaism and Islam, is that Gnosticism, let's look at these other religions first. These other religions are, it's us-centric, if that makes sense. This whole reality was built for us individually, not even collectively, us individually, and this is an individual test, and it's all about your particular salvation and doing X, Y, and Z correctly or incorrectly. Even in the New Age, same idea. This is all built for you, each individually. Gnosticism, I do believe, is unique because it describes the nature of everything not as this beautifully, perfectly, elaborately designed test for each and every one of us individually, but more as a system to contain us collectively, which to me makes more sense, especially when you look at the randomness of the world and the total variance that you have in individual circumstances and situations. It doesn't seem to fit cleanly into this narrative that everything has been perfectly designed for our individual life for this one purpose. Instead, what the world feels a lot more like is a system that contains all of us, the best it can, probably not 100% of the time, but the best it can, and it has all these different protocols and characteristics that help to keep us contained. So the analogy that I would think is very apropos is if, just like if we had a herd of sheep and we're trying to manage this herd, we're using this herd to maybe collect the hair of the animals to make certain products or things like that. And we are not thinking about each individual sheep's having the perfect, this amazing life and having it make sense and having it be a growth experience that's perfectly tailored to their soul or to their energy or to their personality traits. Instead, it's all about collectively keeping the herd together, keeping them healthy so that we can harvest the wool or whatever it is that we harvest from sheep. I think it's wool, right? And that's about it. And us trying to apply these other ideologies of saying, no, this is perfectly tailored to me and my personal growth, this is a test for me, like in Christianity or Islam or whatever it may be, would be akin to one of the sheep being like, man, I wonder why I was placed in this herd and why every week my hair is sheared, and it must be for my personal growth to go through the shearing every process and to get more comfortable with it each week. And man, I was brought into this herd and maybe befriended these two other sheep because one is really pushing me to grow, the other one is really nurturing me, and this is going to be for the process of me growing or becoming stronger or better. And it's like, you look at it from the outside and you think that's a bit preposterous. You're just there because this farmer selected you and put you in the herd, and you're just helping his output and his bottom line, right? So I was just thinking about this the other day. I feel like that's a very good analogy of when we try to put this really specific individualistic framework around what we're in and how it does. I don't really think, at least to me, that makes sense when you look at just how chaotic and how much variation and how much craziness there is on this planet in terms of circumstances, what you're born with, where you're born in the world, etc. I don't think it's this type of individual, perfectly, all beautifully held together test for our individual growth. There's probably a collective system that is concerned with something else, and then maybe we're creating these narratives, or we want to believe these narratives, that it is for our benefit. Okay, without further ado, just want to start with that. Let's get into the mix. Let's get into this amazing video. So first, we're just talking about who are the Archons. This is from Gnostic Talk. I'll link it in the description if you want to see the video in its entirety, but I just gathered, I think, like 6 or 7 excerpts that I want to talk about. Who are the Archons? And again, the Archons are, if Gnosticism is new to you, the Archons are the entities or individuals. Some believe could be reptilians or spiritual entities. We don't know exactly, but it's a collective term for those that are managing and maintaining and running the system, keeping us enclosed in the system, etc. The guards of the prison, if you will.
In the Apocryphon of John, one of the most complete cosmological documents recovered from Nag Hammadi in 1945, the Archons are described not as evil in the cartoonish sense, but as incomplete. They are the creations of the Demiurge, the false craftsman god who built the material world without full access to divine light. The Archons inherit that incompleteness. They rule the planetary spheres, 7 of them, stacked like concentric shells around the Earth, and they govern through ignorance, not malice. They don't know what they're missing. That's what makes them dangerous. Ignorance administering a system it believes is correct is far more effective than deliberate cruelty.
Okay. So what I find really, really interesting now when I look back on this is 2 things. Number 1, we talk about the Demiurge, that is the creator of this entire system of reality and matrix, as less as being evil and more as being ignorant or imperfect. And man, doesn't that resonate with so many people when you think, you could try and stretch and say, no, the world is perfect. We just can't tell how perfect it is because we don't have the capacity to understand it. And if that resonates with you and makes sense with you, then it is what it is. I get it, I guess. And I don't know. I think we're just on different wavelengths, but I think for so many things that I've covered on this channel, if you really sit and look at the world and see how crazy it is in terms of the way we are, but not just the way we are, the way that nature is structured, the food chain, how perverse it is that we must constantly consume and destroy just to stay alive, it makes sense that you could say it's a evil creator, perhaps too, that is constantly keeping us in flux and in panic and all this stuff, but it's an imperfect design made by an imperfect creator. Like, that stuff resonates. When they talk about the Archons, again, I think sometimes you could look, depending on which theology you're following, the Archons might be the demons or those trying to keep us in chaos and whatnot. But going back to that farm analogy of the sheep, it's more like the herders. It's the ones in charge. They're not necessarily trying to torture the sheep and make their lives miserable, but they have their journey in that life from start to finish really isn't on the minds of the ones herding the sheep. They just want to keep them around for the purpose of extracting the sheep here. Much like in this analogy, they want to keep us around and enclosed in the system to maximize the Loosh extraction. Loosh, for those of you who are unfamiliar, if this is your first time coming to Gnosticism, Loosh is kind of at the center of this whole system. It's what we theorize is being extracted. It's the why. It's why we are in this enclosure, is because our energy, emotional energy, both positive and negative emotions, is being collected and harvested, not only used for potentially other purposes, external purposes within some sort of like a technological application, but it's also used to power this entire system in itself. So the system runs, we are part of the system and we run the system, is the main theory and idea. If this is new to you, I know this is going to be a lot. It's probably going to be blowing your mind, but there's many other people that have theorized or seen this system of energy extraction, energy harvesting, not just through Gnosticism, but if you want to look at Bob Monroe, if you want to look at other remote viewers, we have other people that astral project that have seen the framework. And so this is where this idea has come into being, that this is an enclosed system and that the energy to run the system is actually coming from us. We call it either Loosh or Intuitive Underground, a independent remote viewing group. They call it soul power. It's a funny name. Let's move on. Next, reincarnation and memory. They are linked together. This idea of reincarnation was a foundational piece of Gnosticism. I think many of us who have explored NDEs or other means of extracting information about where we go when we pass on, I think the majority of us, with some exceptions, have come to, and I'm not talking about people within mainstream religion, but the majority of us who have researched this topic, I think we've come to the conclusion that our soul, our energy, our essence is immortal, everlasting, and therefore reincarnation makes the most sense. That we come in, we exit, we come back in, we exit, therefore multiple lives seems to be more logically sound than a singular life when it's so small, such a little fragment of space and time. All right, anyways, how is reincarnation and memory related? Check this out.
According to the Apocryphon of John, when a soul departs the physical body, it doesn't simply drift upward into light. It encounters these spheres. Each one is administered by a specific archon. Each archon demands something, a toll of sorts, though the texts frame it differently. What they actually extract is the soul's energy, its divine light, piece by piece, as it ascends. By the time the soul has passed through all 7 spheres.
By the way, this extraction of energy would be akin to Loosh. Also, Loosh is extracted. The theory is that Loosh is extracted during our lifetime in existence here, but a lot of people do think that Loosh is also extracted once we pass on, once the soul is taken out of the flesh and blood body.
It has been so thoroughly stripped of its accumulated spiritual awareness that it returns to the material world effectively blank. No memory of previous lives, no memory of its origin in the Pleroma, the divine fullness above the Demiurge's creation, no memory of the trap at all, and so it enters a new body, and the cycle begins again.
A couple things I want to say. One, the memory wipe, or this constant memory wipe, which is discussed in so many other places, other ancient texts, etc. But this idea of a memory wipe, why is it there? Well, or what does that explain? It explains the fact that if we are having multiple lives and we are infinitely, if we exist throughout infinity, it's why we don't remember previous lives, previous existences outside of this one individual life. Now, some people do. There are exceptions to this. People have pre-birth memories. People do have past life memories, and I believe those are aberrations in the setup and system of the Matrix. They're not supposed to happen, but of course, sometimes it does happen. The memory wipe is imperfect, but again, reincarnation, us being immortal, I think we are fooled into believing that we're not, or that this is our first, we just burst into existence with this life that is able to be pushed forward, that is a possibility because our memories are wiped. And also, I think the reason for the memory wipe, as many people theorize, is it doesn't allow our knowledge base to keep growing and growing and be like, wait a minute, my last life was like this one is like that, this one is like that. Am I really growing? Is this truly an evolutionary process or spiritual evolvement? Or am I kind of stuck in some sort of a loop? What's going on? So I think it also limits our ability to figure out the system and in the entrapment system and what's really going on. Why is it so important that our memories are wiped? Because you could say also, well, if we're trapped in the system, if we remember or not, we're stuck. What's the difference? This goes back to the idea of free will and how important free will is, and how this highlights a point that we actually are in way more control than we think we are. The memory wipe is a manipulation tactic that basically thwarts us using free will to get out. Because if we knew the whole system was a system and just not really here for our growth but for entrapment, we say, okay, I don't want to come back, and you're not going to convince me, I'm out of here, peace. And what a lot of people believe is that the law of free will, I talked about this in a recent video from Bill Segula, where he's learned a lot of this information from many past life regression sessions, is that the law of free will is paramount. And these entities, these ones in control, the Archons, whatever you want to call it, in control of the system, they have to follow the law of free will, or the system will not be sustainable. And so this is a way to get around the law of free will. It's like you remove our memories, and then you're able to convince us to kind of keep reincarnating, even if it's under false, basically lies and manipulation. If you agree, then the system can continue. But if you refuse, ultimately the idea is you can't be stopped. So that's the reason as well for the memory wipe, so they can stay within the bounds of free will. Moving on, he talks here about the mechanics of the trap from the Gnostic vantage point.
How does the reincarnation trap actually function according to the texts? There are several components, and each one matters. First, the soul's amnesia is not accidental. In the Apocryphon of John, the Demiurge and his Archons deliberately bind the soul with what the text calls chains of forgetfulness. This is not poetic language for natural memory fade. It is described as an active process, something imposed. The soul arrives in physical incarnation already sealed, already cut off from its own origin, already blind to what it is. Second, the material world itself functions as a distraction mechanism. The texts in the Nag Hammadi library, including the Gospel of Philip, describe the Demiurge's creation as a counterfeit fullness, a simulation of genuine divine reality, convincing enough to hold the soul's attention across entire lifetimes.
When we talk about the distraction, and this is something I've talked about a lot on the channel since first discovering Gnosticism, but I want to highlight this point. Isn't that what the world is? I talked about this in a recent video. Just look at the way everything is structured with entertainment, with sports. How many movies are being crammed down our throat? I was thinking about this the other day when I saw the Odyssey. I'm like, why am I even here? What is this? A bunch of people make-believing and telling the story, which is a cool story. I used to love Greek mythology, but why did I even come here? How is this furthering anything? You know what I mean? Distraction, sports, distraction. I love them. Okay, or I love mixed martial arts, the one sport that I really enjoy. I love that. But politics, these hot button issues, I was just talking about this as well, that seem to be almost intentionally propped up by the media to get a debate going, and there's why are these particular topics seem to come to the forefront? Because there's a lot of good arguments on one side, a lot of good arguments on the other side, hence why they kind of stay stagnant and people just keep fighting nonstop. What is that? To me, that's a distraction to keep us looking forward on the conveyor belt of life, as opposed to looking up and being like, wait, what is this whole life thing that we are on? What is the whole system beyond just this linear life? So anyways, he talks about the Apocryphon of John, which is a book from the Nag Hammadi collection and is a very central piece of Gnosticism. But they talk about this being a bunch of distractions. And I think you can clearly see that's I think what this world is. Some of it is inherently built into the structure and the nature of the world, meaning just nature, survival mechanisms, what we have to focus on. But then now there are all these human overlays that are added on, I think intentionally so, to keep us constantly focused on this thing, to that thing, to the other thing, to money, to career growth, to family, to all these things. So we're not thinking broadly about what exactly is this and what is the broader purpose.
You don't escape a prison you don't know you're in. Third, conventional religion, according to the Gnostic view, does not help. This is the most unsettling part for a lot of people. The Demiurge is worshipped across the world's major religious traditions as the supreme god. Petitioning him for salvation, according to Gnostic cosmology, is the equivalent of asking your jailer to let you go. He may offer comfort, he may offer moral structure, but he cannot offer what he does not possess. genuine divine light, genuine gnosis, genuine exit from the system he administers, can't exactly put a collection plate in front of someone's internal liberation just saying. One viewer left a comment on my video, "I stopped praying to God, and this is who actually answered that landed exactly on this point." They wrote, "The bit I think is important about this is why would a perfect all-knowing being who is complete need prayer to him? He would not need his ego to be boosted." That's the question the Gnostics had been asking for 2,000 years. So now the question is, what does the trap actually feel like from the inside? Because if it's working correctly, you wouldn't feel it at all. That's the point. The Gnostic texts describe the soul's condition in the material world using a term that appears across multiple documents: hypnos, sleep, not metaphorical drowsiness, ontological sleep, a state in which the soul is functionally unconscious of its own nature. It moves through life, accumulates experience, forms attachments, follows the laws of the system it believes is real, and eventually dies, at which point the Archons process it and return it, stripped and sealed, to do the whole thing over again.
Okay, hold on. I want to show you guys something real quick once again. Oops, hold on.
How does the
Go back to this little slide. This slide is exactly the visual. Whoops, exactly the visual that I think is that I think about all the time. Hold on.
Accumulates experience, forms attachments, follows the...
Okay, when I talk about life being a conveyor belt, this is just right here. This nails it. So we're looking just forward the whole time. You grow up, you become a kid, you become an adult, you go to work, married, have a family, get older, and pass away. Meanwhile, without ever thinking, you're just kind of looking forward to the next step, to the next step, the next step. Okay, now we're done. And then without even looking up here, what's going on above? What is this whole enclosure? What is the broader purpose? Why am I, and these religious different entities, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, that just to name a few, obviously give us some semblance of what this is all about. And I think what we need to, right, it's just, it's a singular life, it's a singular test. And this is where hopefully you either go to heaven or hell based on how well you pass through everything. And I think that worked for a long time. I think the reason for the rise in New Age and a lot of these other philosophies now is because a lot of people are questioning that narrative. It's not making as much sense to most people, I think, today, whether that means we've spiritually evolved or I don't know how we could exactly describe it. But so these were the explanations given of, okay, hey, like, this is the big picture. We got it solved. You're good. So just live a good life, follow these strictures, and don't really think too much about it because we got all of the answers. And that's effectively the extent to which people were looking at the whole system. My whole thing on this channel is those are certainly, I think, in my opinion, very, very incomplete. They don't resonate with me whatsoever. It just doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. It's not a satisfactory answer whatsoever. And I think any theory that tries to explain everything, that says, hey, it's all done and we don't have to think about anything else, this is it. When you're talking about the framework of what is really going on in the grand scheme of things for the purpose of life, you don't have to think about it more because we figured it out, and just look at this and don't think about it anymore. And if you do think about it more, that's a problem. Anything that I think is going to operate like that is inherently problematic. No, let's keep exploring. Let's keep learning. What's the problem with that? Why should we stop any further learning? Just like why would we stop any further learning and growth in other things that are acceptable, by society on this planet, right? So anyways, I thought this was a really cool visual. You're just kind of going forward on the conveyor belt of life and not really taking the time to question what's going on. Gnosis, right? Why is this called Gnosticism? Because it's about gnosis. It's about self-realization, self-awareness. Let's check it out.
Pistis Sophia, one of the longer Gnostic texts, likely compiled between the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, contains some of the most detailed descriptions of the afterlife processing system that exist anywhere in ancient literature. In it, Sophia describes how the Archons of each sphere interrogate the ascending soul. They present the soul with a version of itself it recognizes, its accumulated personality, its memories, its emotional patterns from the life just lived. And the soul, still identified with those patterns, gets pulled back in. Not by force, by attachment. The trap works through the soul's own clinging to what it believes it is. This is the part I personally think is the most devastatingly precise thing in any of these texts. The Archons don't need to drag you back. They just need to show you a mirror. And if you don't know the difference between your divine spark and the personality it temporarily inhabited, you'll reach for the reflection every time. That's not cruelty, that's engineering. Now, and this is critical, the Gnostic tradition did not leave this as a hopeless diagnosis. There is a countermeasure built into the cosmology. It appears across multiple texts, and it always hinges on the same thing: Gnosis. Not knowledge in the academic sense, not information you can collect and store. Gnosis as direct, interior recognition of your own nature as a fragment of divine light temporarily housed in a material body built by a lesser god. The distinction matters enormously. You can read every text in the Nag Hammadi library and still not have Gnosis. That's not Gnosis. That's just a library card. Gnosis is the moment the soul recognizes itself. And according to the texts, that recognition is the one thing the Archons cannot process. They can strip memory, they can trigger attachment, but they cannot extract what has already seen through the illusion. A soul that recognizes itself in the moment of death, that knows it is not the accumulated personality, not the memories, not the emotional history, but the divine spark wearing all of it temporarily. That soul, according to the Gnostic framework, cannot be rerouted. It passes through the spheres without being depleted, because it has nothing the Archons can reach.
Having this realization or recognition reminds me of what Isabella Green talks about, of effectively at the moment of death, having this knowledge or learning this type of information, able to shoot out past the entirety of the matrix and into the true void, as she calls it, which we might call the gateway to the Pleroma, or the Pleroma in Gnosticism is basically going back to God, if you will. So what are they talking about with Gnosis? Now, I'm going to state right up front that I'm not sure if I even fully understand just yet the scope and the exactly what true Gnosis is, or truly understanding the real nature of yourself, meaning the fact that you're a divine spark and you're not this individual body. But I think these are things that have been discussed by many folks, including Howdy McCoskey, of course. And I think ultimately it comes down to this idea that we really identify with, like I identify with Huzaifa, with this avatar, with my family, with the things that I've done in this life. And I think what the main point is if we can, it's not really true. Of course, if you buy into this idea that we are infinite, our souls are eternal, there's reincarnation, why am I more this person than I was in the last life or the subsequent life? I'm not. And so ultimately, what is our true essence? It's not these individual incarnations. It's something beyond. It's that divine spark that is uniform, that is coming into each of these incarnations, into each of these bodies. That is the truth. And I think ultimately, if we recognize that truth, we can no longer be trapped within the system and manipulated and say, hey, because of this life or that life, you did something wrong or right, and therefore you need to come back for this particular purpose. That won't work anymore, because it's like, wait a minute, I am not that person. I'm theorizing here, right? I am not that person that did X, Y, and Z and needs these types of corrections. I'm something beyond that. And once you have that realization, because of the law of free will, you can't be contained by the system. It's kind of, if we also go back to this idea of looking at it as an analogy of a herder keeping the sheep inside the system. If the sheep can recognize ultimately that there is even an enclosure, as opposed to just thinking, no, this is the whole nature of reality, I'm in this enclosure, this is the entire world. Once they how can they even try to get out beyond the fences or get out beyond their landscape until they recognize that there is more to the landscape, that they are being enclosed? And then how do they get through the enclosure? It's just coming to this realization, I think, self-realization of Gnosis, of you are a divine spark, you are not this individual entity, that starts to get you to realize, well, wait a minute, if I'm not this entity, then why am I in this entity? Because I think your essence in this life, your physical body, is part of this containment system, and then you can start to think beyond it. That's how I would try to explain it at this current point in my journey. But like I said, caveat, I'm not even sure I fully grasp everything yet. What about souls that don't wake up? This is discussed as well in this video and in Gnosticism. By the way, this idea that your soul is being recycled forever, don't take that title and think we're trapped forever and that's just, it just sucks and this is all gloom and doom. Forever is an impossibly long time. That means it stretches to infinity. We are infinite beings. I do think that is for sure the case. How can you trap something for forever? Because forever implies there's always another opportunity to escape, to get out, for the system to crumble. So I think it is logically impossible to say that we would be trapped for forever, because that can't ever be proven. You're always going to have a way out. This is why I think that ultimately the system will fail and fall, and we will actually all be able to go wherever we want at some point. Ultimately, I just don't know when that is, but it will happen if you just think about it from a mathematical perspective, stretching out the timeline to infinity. But anyways, what does it mean? What happens to souls that don't wake up, that don't have gnosis?
What they all agree on is this: once recognition happens, it cannot be undone. The Archons cannot reseal what has genuinely opened. That's not a small claim. That is the central claim of the entire tradition. And it explains, more than anything else, why this tradition was the one the institutional church chose to exterminate most thoroughly. Not the traditions that disagreed about doctrine, not the traditions that quarreled about scripture. The tradition that said the soul, once genuinely awake, is beyond the reach of any system, ecclesiastical, cosmic, or otherwise. You cannot control what cannot be reached. You cannot extract tribute from what knows it owes nothing. Now here is where it gets cosmically significant, because once you understand that the soul, once genuinely awake, is beyond the reach of any system, you have to ask the question the Gnostic texts actually answer. What happens to the souls that don't wake up? What happens to the ones who go through life and through death, still operating inside the archonic framework without ever questioning it? The texts have a precise answer. And I want to be clear, this is not metaphor dressed up as cosmology. The Gnostic tradition treated this as a literal description of a literal process. They called it the recycling of souls, the return, the loop. Here is how the Apocryphon of John frames it. When a soul exits the physical body without having achieved gnosis, without that interior recognition of its divine origin, it does not pass through into the Pleroma, the realm of fullness and light from which all souls ultimately emerged. Instead, it gets captured, redirected. The Archons, who govern the planetary spheres between the material world and the Pleroma, intercept it. They process it back through the cycle of embodiment. A new body, a new life, another round inside the prison, without any memory of the previous round, without any map for the current one. Amnesia is not a side effect. Amnesia is the design. This is the part that stopped me completely the first time I read it. I had to put the text down. I'm not exaggerating. I spent a long evening with the Apocryphon of John open on my desk, and I got to that passage, the one describing how the Archons return souls to the material world through what the text calls the bond of forgetfulness. And I just sat there. Because the system being described isn't punitive. It isn't evil in a cartoon sense. It's administrative. It's a mechanism. The Demiurge and the Archons aren't torturing souls. They're managing them efficiently, indefinitely, without malice and without...
Exactly. You're keeping the herd together. You're keeping your flock intact. You're not trying to say, oh, this sheep did this on this day, and therefore we need to it's going to be in trouble, and we need to do X, Y, and Z to balance it out karmically. And then now it comes back in. It's like, it's not about that. Maybe they're creating those narratives in their mind because they want to make sense of it from an individual standpoint, but it's not individual at all. They're just trying to keep the herd intact and keep their flock coming back, surviving, being healthy, so they can extract what they need to extract from. But another thing, yeah, it's just reincarnation. You don't wake up, you go back and you repeat. Now, this is actually, might be for a lot of people, a positive revelation, because those folks who insist on thinking that it's some sort of a bifurcation of fates, and one is purely punitive, one is purely just amazing and bliss. Okay, well, for those of you who are scared about that one destination, I'm talking about hell, describing Christianity and Islam, specifically of eternal torment, that's off the table. That's not a thing. You just come back into this life. You're already living this life. So obviously we can have worse circumstances or situations. That of course is there, and maybe that can be a little scary for some people, but yeah, it's much better than this idea of eternal torment, which, like I said, mathematically is it's as silly as being trapped forever, recycled forever, whatever it may be. But ultimately, you don't have Gnosis, you go back, but then there's another chance to have Gnosis, to wake up, to escape the system. So that's the positive message there. Memory and distraction. Again, talking about the memory wipe and talking about the distractions that we talked about in a previous clip. Check it out.
Just rely on forgetfulness between lives. They rely on it during life. The entire architecture of the material world, its pleasures, its anxieties, its social hierarchies, its religious systems, yes, including those, is structured to keep the divine spark inside a human being from ever recognizing what it is. Distraction is the primary tool. Not chains, not cages, noise, the constant ordinary noise of survival, ambition, grief, entertainment, doctrine, and desire. And when something threatens to cut through that noise, when a teaching arises that tells the soul it is not a creature waiting for divine mercy, but a fragment of the divine itself, temporarily misplaced, that is when suppression moves from passive to active.
There it is, distraction. I just think when you look at the entire world and how crazy it is and wild, and a lot of the things that just seem nonsensical, like we talk about clown world, the entire political system, I think most people are waking up to the fact that it's one big joke, and the people we are electing are, it's just so backwards. What is all of this? Distraction, as opposed to us trying to figure things out and to keep us distracted and to keep us from looking at the larger picture. And that's only one piece. I mean, I'm picking on politics. There's so many other things that are constant distraction. And ultimately, why is the distraction so important? Why don't they just put us in chains? Why don't they, if this is truly a prison planet, as people might say, that doesn't make sense. Why even go through all the rigmarole of distraction and lies and manipulation? It comes back to the law of free will, and you can't just simply bypass. Well, I'll do a video breakdown at some other point about all the different cultures have talked about this idea of the law of free will for the longest time. But ultimately, it comes down to, if you just totally commandeer the law of free will, which seems to be a universal law of God, I suppose, structures will collapse, structures will fall down. So this is a way to somewhat stay within those bounds, and therefore keeping the entire system intact and keeping out potentially intervening forces. Last but not least, talked about it, but we're going to reiterate it one more time. This is not a punishment. Again, think about the sheep. It's funny if you could see, it would make sense if sheep are trying to make sense of their reality and this thing happening and that thing happening. Oh, this is because I did that or did this or did the other. And it's like, wait a minute, look at it from the perspective of the herder. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's just keeping the collective group together. Sometimes he has to do certain things to an individual sheep to keep it in line, to keep it healthy, to do whatever. But looking at it from the standpoint of, this is, hey, an experience that's perfectly tailored for my individual experience and growth, you're just creating a narrative that doesn't make sense. And obviously from our position and standpoint, knowing we are the herder, we know the herder, it's like, no, we know that really doesn't make sense. So anyways, here it is. This reality is not a punishment.
This is what I want you to sit with before we close. The reincarnation trap, as the Gnostics understood it, is not a punishment, and it is not a design flaw. It is a consequence of amnesia. And amnesia, unlike malice, can be dissolved by something as structurally simple as remembering. Not remembering past lives. Not remembering facts about ancient cosmology. Remembering what you are, beneath the counterfeit spirit, beneath the archonic overlay, beneath the noise. The tradition doesn't promise this is easy. It promises it is possible, and it insists across every text, every community, every variation of the teaching, that once it happens, it holds. The recognition that dissolves the trap cannot be resealed by the trap. The soul that has genuinely seen through the mechanism does not forget between incarnations in the same way, because the divine spark has reoriented. It is no longer pointing outward, waiting for external validation from a system designed to keep it waiting. It is pointing inward, and what it finds there is not a personal self, but the monad itself looking back. Stop waiting for permission from a system that profits from your waiting. Start recognizing what was never actually hidden from you, only obscured. You were not placed here to cycle indefinitely through the administration of the Archons. You were placed here, or rather, you placed yourself here, as a fragment of the Pleroma temporarily inside a material shell, capable at any moment of remembering the full weight of what that means. That is the teaching. That is what they burned the libraries to suppress. That is what Irenaeus wrote 4 volumes against. That is what one vote in Rome might have made the official theology of Western civilization, and didn't. And that is what's still here, waiting. Not in a distant text, not in a hidden ritual, but in the part of you that has been quietly unsettled this entire video, wondering whether you already knew.
Okay, now, as we close out, one of the biggest themes I think in this video is it's about that self-realization, that recognition. We are a divine spark. We are not this body. We are not this particular identity in this life. Moreover, why is that so important? Well, we also hear a lot of people say, like there was one gentleman that said, what you need to say at the moment of death is, I want to go home. I just want to go to my true home. Or other people say, I revoke all contracts that I signed under amnesia. These different recitations or these different directions. Hey, when you get here, turn left and go right and this and that and the other. And I think right now, again, this is a theory. I don't know if this is true. This is just my brain trying to be logical. I think that these specific instructions of how to escape, 45-degree angle, this, that, and the other, are misguided. And I want to tell you why. I think it comes down to the root. It comes down to the core of what all these different protocols are about recognizing our true selves, our divinity, and our ability to exercise free will. And if you instead go about this process by trying to look at a set of protocols, these are the steps by which you exit, that are 1,000 or 2,000 years old, or 500 years old, or 10 years old, or 5 years old, or 1 year old, I think that is potentially going down the wrong path. Let me tell you why. We're going to go back to the analogy of the sheep being herded, being enclosed by a farmer. And let's say one of the sheep discovers a hole in the fence. They run back, they tell everybody there's a hole in the fence. Oh my God, there's a way to get back to nature, to get back to the real world where all of the rest of our family are, and we can roam and free. We don't have to get sheared every week. It's amazing. Say, this is the way to do it. And they tell them and they bounce. And then the next morning, the rest of the sheep say, hey, he showed us the way out of this system. There's a hole. They go to that same place where that hole is. And now, where there was a hole before in the fence, now there's a little pathway that was built on. They had no idea this was added on, but they go through that hole and they're like, oh, cool. Like, we did it. We found it. And then the hole is a new pathway rerouted right back into the system. And they come right back in. They're like, this is it. We did it. We followed the instructions and we're here, but they've just been rerouted. Why? Because it's a system, and the system can be, it can be modified and it can be enhanced to protect against these little breaches, right? So the farmer realized, oh my God, one of my sheep escaped. Let me fix it. Let me kind of do this wraparound thing. Then later on, a few weeks later, they discover a hole underneath one of the fences. Oh my God, I discovered a hole. Boom. One of them escapes. They tell everybody, hey, we found this way out of the system. Next week, they try and go through the hole. The hole is dug back around by the farmer to go back in. And so once again, they think they're out, but they're back inside. My point is if you think about it from specific protocols that maybe have been successful and been unearthed at one point, I think you're potentially setting yourself up for disappointment, because this is a system like anything we built and create in this world, and that can be updated, that can be modified, that can be bolstered. What can't be modified and what can't be bolstered is the underlying theme, which is this recognition of self, this recognition that we have free will, we have authority, we have sovereignty. And so I think that this is the key. It's just that baseline recognition Forget about the specifics of the protocol. I think right now, people might disagree with me and they might be right. I could be wrong on this, but this is where I'm at logically right now, especially when I think within the framework of this analogy. It's more about the core understanding, this core idea of Gnosis, than any set of particular protocols. That's where I'm at right now. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think I'm onto something? Do you think I have the right frame of mind here? Do you think I'm missing something? And if so, let me know what that is. Also, did you find it especially useful now to go back and revisit Gnosticism, given all that we have learned thus far from remote viewers, astral projectors, pre-life memories, people that are administering what's it called, quantum healing, or these past life regression therapies? NDEs obviously are still a part of the framework in some way, even though those are largely, or if not almost universally deceptive, but there's still great information in those. Let me know your thoughts. That's all I got. Thank you guys so much for joining. We'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.